lines. They're there. They're there, and they're broken dots along the way. And as a writer, I'm shading in and out of those lines. So that's where the feeling comes in also. What did it feel like for a woman in the 19th century to be suddenly plucked from her home? Yes, we know it happened, like we were taught that in school, but what does it actually mean for that to happen to a person? I think we as writers of historical fiction go back and inhabit these people, or they inhabit us,
Yeah.
and then we tell those stories. So through that, the feeling comes through. And also, just because there's so much that doesn't exist for us as writers, our imaginations just have to do a lot of work. So I'm always constantly straddling the line between, okay, what are the facts? I need to know what people were wearing. I can't just make up what people were wearing. And, okay, there's nothing that's telling me what people were wearing. So I have to make it up. So it's a fine line between what was, what could have been, and what I'm trying to bring to life.
Can I comment on that? So one of the things that happened to me when I was writing, because I was in Britain, I had access to some of the colonial texts, the early explorers and missionaries who came to Buganda Kingdom. So these people were funny. So they would come to the king, to the palace, and they are talking to the Kabaka, but they are drawing everything they are seeing. And in spite of what we think of them, I had a picture, and I had notes written by one person observing what is going on. And so I drew this picture in my language, and people are like, oh my God, how did you imagine? I didn't recognize Speak or Grant. I didn't say that's where I got them. But however, on other texts, you had, so oral history is often performed by men in my culture, yeah? So the histories would be told by a man who, of course, is speaking Luganda and is telling it to a person who speaks Swahili, and the person then who translates into English to the white person. And the text you end up with was unbelievable. So you had to be aware that so much was lost in translation and so much was gained, because these people would not say, I don't know what I'm talking about. They would just fill in the gaps themselves. So you had to blow the chaff, the Eurocentric chaff off. That's one layer. Then you take the translator's chaff off. And then you blow off the masculine nature of oral history off. And what is left were the gems. And that's where we found the hidden figures, women. They were always women. So, for example, and this took me by surprise, in Chintu, I have a king mother, who had 3 sons. And because in Buganda we had 3 officers in terms of, you have the king, you have the king's mother, and you have the parliament. So the king mother, to remain in office, she was using her sons. She used the first son to kill the dad. Got rid of the dad and stayed in office. When she realized the oldest son was becoming weak, she used the second son to kill the oldest son. She was remaining in office. The boys, the son, the husbands were dying. And then she used the last son to kill the second son. And her name was Nabulia. And when the book came out, everybody was like, oh my God, so this is where the name comes from. And then suddenly there was this national amnesia suddenly disappears. And somebody writes in the paper, say, Jennifer doesn't know what she's talking about. This woman was Kabaka. Kabaka is king. For 2 years. I thought she just used her children to kill, and so she remains in office. But she remained in office, and we don't do queens in Buganda. We are very patriarchal. But this is what historical fiction does. It reminds the nation. So where did that memory come from, that had not been talked about? Suddenly people start to remember things about themselves.
Yeah, I had the same effect with the 100 also Salaga. People would come up to me and say, oh, in our families, there was always this branch of the family that was, we knew they were not really related, but they had been in the family for so long,
Yeah.
so that an idea of enslavement,
Yeah.
suddenly people just thought, oh, how come this family has always been there, but they're not blood relatives? So it opens up conversations in big ways. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah, I mean, that's the fascinating thing about, for those who haven't read King 2, there's a lot of that kind of killing going on there.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, how do you censor yourself? You're like, this detail is a bit too ugly, to put out there. And yours that is digging up this, making people question their family histories and realizing, oh yeah, shit, maybe we were slave owners before, right? How comfortable were you kind of putting those details out?
I don't think I censor myself. I think for me, the work is to go back and I'm shining light in these shadow spaces, in these hidden areas. So to censor myself is to do myself and whoever's going to read the book a disservice. I think I am sensitive to what the information can do to people. So sometimes I'll be careful with the way I present things, but I won't censor myself because this is part of the work, is to bring it all to light. So I'm not going to hold back, but I will be sensitive in the way I present the information.
I censored myself a little bit, yeah. I'm Ugandan, and apparently we are the most homophobic nation in the world. Apology. But so I had a character that this world would call gay or bisexual. We just call them human beings, in the past. And so I wrote him into the book. By then we had started with a Kill Bill, so I wrote him in, and then I wrote him out, and then I put him back in, and then I removed it. Because I kept on thinking, what are the implications for my family? What are the implications for me when I go back to Uganda? And indeed, in the end, I was brave enough to leave him in the book. And indeed, there are members of the family who stopped talking to me because of it. And in order to stop me from behaving badly, some people said, oh, she's gay. Yeah, because in Uganda, to punish you that well, And so there's still members of the, and I thought, if I'm not going to say I'm not, because then other homophobes can, disappear. And so I was quite aware of that. And there are other elements, because I was playing around with people's history. It's not mine. And the idea of Chintu, Chintu is the first man on earth, and this figure belongs to the whole of Uganda. So I really had to be careful how I handled this figure. So for us in Uganda, we are Bana ba Chintu, which means we are children of Chintu. It's no joke. It's an Adamic figure for the West, But people in the West don't say we are Adam's children. In Buganda, we are. So I had to be careful with what I did with that kind of history, But in the end, I was brave enough. And I remember there was a young boy who wrote to me and said, Auntie, is it really, really true the whites didn't bring homosexuality to Uganda? And I said, no, it was here in the 1700s. I said, no, but the Arabs did. Arabs are so homosexual. I said, no, the 1700s, the Arabs hadn't arrived in Uganda, so it's just another way of being. So, yes, I do censor myself sometimes.
I mean, for me, I think it's important that, certain historical notes are acknowledged, that things happened. They may not be pleasant and they may be contestatious, um, but capturing how the people who were involved in that situation felt, right, was very important in contextualizing what happened. And I kind of often resorted to that. Yes, there were incidences, because when we were Fireflies, I kind of touched a lot on the history of violence in Nigeria, right? But I didn't focus on the violence itself. I focused on the people who were involved and what mood were they in when they made the decisions that they made that led to what happened, right? So to take you back to something you mentioned about contentious history,
Yeah.
right? How did you find the balance, right? To either aggravate people, if that's what you wanted to do, or not aggravate people and have them focused on the story?
So, normally, I don't know about other authors, but I don't do research in history before the story is finished. Because, research has a way of taking you into all sorts of directions you didn't mean to be. So I would research about Buganda and find something out I'd never seen anywhere. And I would think, that's going in the book. And so in the end, I had plastered, like verbatim, all sorts of things in the book. And then you start to read through, and they're sticking out, like, why are you adding that? Because when you go, you've traveled, you spend so much money, you do your research, it had better, fit in. But sometimes you can do research and use one sentence, or use one event or one moment. And it can be painful because the novel has rejected the rest of it. So for me, what is contentious does not arise until the history has, has been melded into the story, and it doesn't stick out as history, it's just the whole story. And if it reads beautiful, then often I don't worry so much, It's only moments like the one that I've talked about. But then I get angry sometimes when I'm writing. I don't know, sometimes I'm laughing to myself with what I'm writing. But if I'm angry, then I'm angry with my community. I'm like, I'm going to confront them. Let them get this. But once that anger goes and I start editing, then it seems out. I wonder whether that makes sense. Yeah.
So I've, with 4 books in, started to lean into having the characters and the story guide me more so than, me going in and saying, I want to write about the war in Salaga or X, Y, and Z. And the thing about working with this process is it lends itself to a certain kind of magic. So then everything I'm living kind of weaves itself in and out of the story, and it's not by my own doing. The book becomes this living and breathing thing. So even like dreams that I'm having weave themselves into the books, and with the Deep Blue Between, for instance, it's a thing that gives me chills till today. I was writing about twin sisters who had been separated and were connected through their dreams, and then along the way, my dad tells me a dream that happened to him that was connected to me. So suddenly this story that I'm working on has become my waking life. So I think leaning more into this process of letting the writing be organic and almost subconscious just means that the writer begins to live the work. So if contentious things are going to happen, then they need to. It's a part of the process. And so I'm learning to just lean into those things. Whereas in the past, I would be like, oh, it doesn't quite fit in here. I need to make it fit into my plan. Whereas now I'm really, really allowing the characters to guide me to where they want to go to. So it can be quite surprising. Like Zainab Takes New York was my pandemic baby, and I wanted it to be light and fun. And then it ends up being, in strange ways, I don't know if readers caught onto this, a historical fiction, because she starts hearing her ancestors' voices. And it's light and fun, But that is something I would never have planned for, and if I hadn't leaned into that process, that magic wouldn't have come through. Yeah.
Yeah, sticking with that, in The Deepest Blue, your research took a very kind of weird form. It was completely accidental. You didn't plan to write the book initially when you were doing the research for it, and then it happens to be like, oh, this is convenient for the book. Could you tell us about that process?
So I had written The 100 Wells of Salaga, and there were two girls, twin sisters of the main character, who disappeared early in the book and ended up haunting me, and I think a number of readers too kept asking, what happened to the girls? And I said, I don't know. And I came to Pidja Festival in 2018 and met Sarah Odedina, who said, have you written for young writers? So I said, no, but I know who I want to write about. So as soon as she gave me the go-ahead, I started writing their story. But I knew that they had left what was then the northern territories of what would become Ghana, and that they had gone down and crossed, at least one of them had crossed water, but I didn't know where they went to. And then flashback to 3 years before any of this happens, I was living in Brazil doing a residency, and I just would follow the other creatives. There were dancers, there was a dancer, there was a filmmaker, a textile artist, and I would just go with them wherever they went. So I learned a lot about Afro-Brazilian culture in Bahia, and I didn't know what I would do with any of it. So then 3 years later, when the chance arose, it made sense that one of them would end up in Brazil. So then I'd already been deep into that world. I'd attended candomblé ceremonies, I'd been to an Egungun ceremony, so I wrote the book without having to do that much research because I was so immersed in that world. And then any research I did afterwards just added to or made sure I was on the right track.
I mean, I could relate to that a lot because when I was writing When We Were Fireflies, right, which was essentially about a man who got to the train station and suddenly remembered that, oh, I've been on a train before and I'd been murdered before. And he goes on the search for the people who had murdered him in the past. And there were details that when I was writing, I never thought about because I'd read them like a long time ago, maybe in an old newspaper, maybe in some book somewhere, that I never articulated that, look, I'm kind of unconsciously building research for this work that I'm going to do in the future. And then I had someone who was like 85, 86 years old who called me after reading my book and he's like, how did you know this detail? Right? It wasn't that it was a historical fact. It was capturing how the characters felt around this event that happened. So that's kind of connected to the experience that you talked about. But moving on to Jennifer, right? Historical fiction, very tricky stuff. Most times, except if you're like dedicated and say, this is what I want to do. This is the kind of writing that I want to do. Most first-time novelists kind of start with, as they say, cliche, I know. Sort of autobiographical stuff, maybe, or they write something from their experience. You decided to go all out and do Chintu.
Yeah.
Why? Why did you do that to yourself?
I know. You know, one of my problems is I overestimate myself most of the time. And I was absolutely naive, like most first writers. And sometimes you get bored with things and you really need a challenge. But that book, it led me into places. You know, so for example, the part where I'm writing this gentleman who is very academic and very cerebral, and therefore I write him his childhood in dream sequences because he's suppressed his memories. I don't know, I look back at that and I think, what were you thinking? You know? But at the time, I was doing a PhD. And you know, when you're doing a PhD, you think you're epic. So that was like, and you know what? Literature hasn't seen this. Let me add that. No, this is fantastic. And in the end, you know, I ended up, and by the way, I didn't know I was writing historical fiction. I did not set out to write historical fiction. It's my supervisor who said, so, historical fiction? And I, oh yeah, of course. But I hadn't realized. And I think I've lost that naivety, that it's a childish approach to writing where you believe you're capable of changing the world. You are capable of introducing new ways of seeing, new ways of being, new ways of reading, which of course now 3 books in, I'm like, okay. If I say a student writing like that, I'm like, I'm waiting for the publishing industry because it's coming with a baseball button hitting you on the head. This is the way you do things. This is what you should do, and whatever. But nonetheless, I'm working on another book now, which is also ridiculously ambitious. So sometimes you have to think about yourself, and you say, oh, if I reproduce another Chintu, what am I getting out of it? Or another First Woman, what am I doing to myself? So there's always that as well.
I think I am still naive then. I think, yes, I do love the idea of just going and being as bold as you can in your own way. So for me, it's writing a book that's set 5,000 years in the past before writing. And I'm still working on it, and it's driving me crazy. And I get headaches from this book sometimes. I say it's doing my head in. Like, why did I do this to myself? But I think it's an important exercise, especially because of where we come from, and because our story has been so controlled for so many years. It's time for us to do that retelling. So it's necessary work, and it's maybe crazy people like us who get to do it, but I think it will pay off in the end.
Yeah. And there's one thing that people don't realize. This is what my publisher told me. More than 1 million titles come out in English every year. So what is going to make mine stand out? Because people are going to read around 52 books a year, okay, out of 1 million books. What will make somebody pick up my book and read? I better come up with something new, something really that would make them hold on to the book and not put it down. So there's that fear of the competition out there in the world.
So I'm curious, because I remember once I was writing a short story about a character who absolutely hated cockroaches, right? And then I decided, you need to give context to this hatred he had for cockroaches. And I decided to research. It was supposed to take 5 minutes. It took me 4 days. Lots of fascinating details. Yeah, absolutely. Lots of fascinating details about cockroaches. I'm like, this shit is too good to just put it away, right? It needs to be in the story. And then I put all of it in the story. It didn't work, right? So I had to take it out. So I just wanted to ask, because you talked about, being cautious about research, and I think that's very important to talk about. But what detail did you find during your research that sort of derailed your story?
Okay. I wrote Chintu 10 years ago. It's making 10 years to next year. So I'll talk about the book I'm writing now. So I've got the brilliant idea of writing Pan-Africanism. Someone asked me what part of Pan-Africanism. It's every part of Pan-Africanism, which is crazy. And I'm already set myself out to fail. But, but one of the things that I do at the beginning is these people are standing in a sanctum and they are looking at the forefathers of Pan-Africanism. And all the names, they are all male, okay? Almost 25 names. And then one of the women in the group says, oh, and all the women not on that wall. So I presented that reading to a group of people. And this woman got so angry, she sent me an email immediately after. And there were all these women, Pan-Africanist women. And Jennifer, you cannot do this. First of all, apparently, the word Pan-African was coined by a woman. Did you know? Did you guys know? No. Guess what? She's African. I know. There was present, and it's a white person who wrote to me, very angry. And she's from South Africa. Her name is Alice Kinloch. She married a Trinidadian man, and they settled in what was Tanganyika then. 1885, that's when she was born. And then another two women, again from the Caribbean, no, three sisters. They carried Pan-Africanism in the 20s. You know, she sent me that link as well. So now that piece that I presented, I'm going back. The whole thing is out. So I've nurtured this chapter since 2019. You can imagine the pain of rewriting it. I'm thinking I'm going to make them ignorant, so they also just discover to protect myself, so I keep my chapter, or they are already aware, but they're already only aware of one. So I'm sitting here listening to people talking, but my mind is like, how am I going to handle this? That's how sometimes research changes everything.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for the book I'm working on now also, there's a similar factoid. I'm sort of taking the myth of the goddess of the sky, Nut, and making her human and telling her story. And I want to tie the sky with writing because they're very linked. But as I'm doing research, I've been working on Nut all along, and then I know that in what's called the Ennead, these goddesses and gods of ancient Egypt, of one region, because there are lots of them, there's a god of writing who's Jehuti. So I know this, and maybe a month ago, I find out that Jehuti has a female companion called Seshat. And then I'm digging some more, and it turns out that she might actually be the one who did the actual inventing of writing. Jehuti just takes the story and spreads it out. You know, you have the messenger, and then you have the person who does the creating. So it's a woman who must have put the first words down. So I find this a month ago, and I've been working on my book for so long also. So I don't know. We're going to have to find a way to use those two bits of information in what I've been working on for about a year now also. So, yeah.
We'll be opening up for questions soon, but before then, do you subscribe to this idea that there's a pressure on African writers to explain Africanness? And if you do, or you don't, how does that tie in with the historical fiction that you write, which essentially places a burden on it to sort of anthropologize the story that you're telling, or anthropologize Africa and explain why you're human and should be considered human?
The burden is there, the pressure is there, but do you give in to that pressure is a question. And I think I was really lucky to work with Bibi Bakari Yusuf on my third novel. So with her, we didn't explain anything. We just wrote the story. There was no glossary. And we come to reading, like I read Russian literature without understanding names, understanding what things were. I've had fellow Ghanaians say to me, oh, I stumbled over some of your names just because it's in a part of the country that they're not used to reading literature from. So I've stopped explaining myself. I think if a reader is invested, they'll do research, they'll take the time out to figure out how things work. And people have said that to me, like, because of your book, I went down this rabbit hole and I learned X, Y, and Z. So I don't bow to the pressure.
So I don't. Of course I don't explain. And I wanted to say I don't, period. I'm not going to even to explain why I don't. But I I have this thing about Uganda. So Uganda is my audience. And I know it's arrogant for me to center the Ugandan reader and then expect the British to publish my books and the world to read them. But if the world readers are anything like me, then they get it. However, I still think about African readers. So in Uganda, we have 4 divisions of the country. We have the Luos, who are not related to the Bantu. So often if I know that the Bantu in Uganda will understand me, that caters for half of Africa, from Cameroon down South Africa. That's catered for. If the northern part of Uganda, who are Luo, understand me, and those are the farthest away from Bantu, then the rest of Africa will understand me. If the rest of Africa understands me, then the world understands me.
Thank you. I want to thank Jennifer for acknowledging her arrogance. And I want to commend you for your arrogance, because we've had books that did not take us into consideration, that were written by people in Britain and in the US and wherever else, and they were forced upon us as recommended texts that we had to read and write exams on. We were not part of that calculation.
No.
Right? So I think it's fair that you do that. So thank you for your arrogance and for representing us with that. So I'm going to ask the final question now before we open up for questions. Hidden Figures, how is the past now for you?
It's funny because I'm writing my 5th book now, and I'm writing now, and I'm writing the future. But I just keep on going into the past. I don't know why, whether you have worked it out, but there's no way for me to write the present or to write the future without going back into the past. And I know that I, as an author, it's also my job to go and look into the past and analyze it and look at the present and predict the future. And Africa, right now, we are at a crossroads. I don't know whether people are aware of this. There's a sense of Africa just, I don't know, I don't want to use the word rising, because that supposes we've been asleep all along. But there's something going on in Africa that is, and we may not be aware, we may not, but we are going somewhere. And we're going somewhere better than where we've been or where we are now. And the rest of the world is also becoming aware, because the rest of the world is beginning, especially the West, is beginning also to decline as we incline. And I think at this moment, this is where people need us to have our eyes opened to the future. What is coming? Supposing Africa becomes a power, what kind of superpower would we be? Supposing the West or the white world declines, how will the black world treat it? I know it's very far away, but I'm not going to be here, and I need to have my word in it. I'm going to contribute to that, So for me, that past, where we came from, is important to now to predict the future.
I agree, and I think there's this thought process or this philosophy of time as cyclical, even in like some of our Khan traditions, where you have you as a center, and then your family, immediate family, then the clan, then the bigger state around you. And then with time, it's the same thing. So as you were talking about Africa becoming a superpower, we've been there before.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just our new turn now.
Yeah. We've gone and maybe we're coming back. So our job is going back to that point and saying, ooh, watch out.
Yeah.
This, watch out.
So you're there as well.
Yeah. we've been
Okay.
there. So and it just goes round and
Yeah,
round and
yeah.
round. So
Yeah.
yeah, our job we're the ones who sit out and say, "Ooh, look out!
Yeah. Yeah.
This has happened before, and if you're not careful, this is going to happen again."
Yeah, yeah. But I'm
And,
surprised
yeah.
you're aware that Europe has had its time, the East is coming, and Africa is coming soon after that, and we better be prepared.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to thank Aisha now because I thanked Jennifer earlier. Thank you for starting a fight that you're not aware that you've started. We had the same publishers, Cassava Republic, and I think I was published before yours, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And it's refreshing to hear that they didn't pressure you about having, what was it called? A glossary, right? We had that debate. It went on for a very long time. And I'm like, I don't want a glossary in my book. It's not a textbook, it's a novel, right? And if you don't get what I'm saying in context, then yeah, maybe it's not for you, right? And they're like, yeah, but there are words that you use, like Hausa words that, people don't get and all of that. So we need a glossary. And I resisted firmly, right? And they put me under enormous pressure. I'm like, it's not going to happen. So in the end, they said, well, how about we create a glossary and put it online? And I said, well, as long as it's not in my book, that's fine. So in the book, there's like, oh yeah, if you need explanations about all these things, you can go to the glossary on the website, which is fine. But they didn't put you under
I have you
pressure.
to thank then.
Yeah, I did that.
No, I have to thank you because you went through that process.
I did, yeah.
And then I didn't have to fight.
Exactly.
So, yeah, they understood the
But
process.
yeah, it doesn't mean that I'm still not going to fight them over it. I'm going to go back and do that. All right, thank you.
Wow.
Why?
No questions? Oh.
Yeah, questions, ladies and gentlemen.
That's also one. Hey. So first of all, thank you for this lovely discussion. You know, you three are among my favorites. So 2 points. Jennifer, if you are a Buganda writer and you center Bugandans, that's not arrogance. That's the beginning of a masterpiece.
Thank you.
Yeah. So don't. It is. So please don't say that. But you also said something, I wrote it down actually, that historical figures in books are sometimes more believable than history.
Yeah.
And this is why historical fiction is important. And I add to that, particularly as a people who've been colonized.
Yes.
See, the independence, I don't know whether we are independent, but to decolonize, I consider,
Yeah.
it's a chance to reimagine ourselves anew.
Yes, yes.
No holds back.
Yes.
In order
Yes.
for us to do that, we must know who we were.
Yes.
But this business, every time people, look, don't even be shackled by the facts.
Oh yeah.
Because there is always an added burden on people who go into African history. Oh, you're not telling the truth. Well, who the fuck cares? Do you understand?
Yeah.
Because like I've said, how many times have I watched a remaking of the Arthurian legend or the Scottish Highlands? Who the fuck cares? I remember when the Woman King came out. Oh my God. If we don't play in our history, we won't discover who we were.
Yeah.
So please play. And
Okay.
if sometimes you have to fudge whatever facts you think you have to fudge. Go ahead and fudge it. Just make it enjoyable.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I
Kina.
quote you? Fantastic. Thank you for that, Kina.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm also a big fan of the two women on the panel.
The man acknowledged that. Thank you.
No shots intended, but yes, historical fiction, very research heavy. Research can be quite time consuming and difficult, especially for those of us who are here.
Yeah.
When you're writing about African historical fiction and they've locked all of the documents in SOAS somewhere. So I wanted to ask, this is me asking you to reveal your hacks to me, please. How do you go about procuring For one, the time to be able to research, the funding to be able to research, and especially considering some of your works are based on oral histories that are, more told than written down. So, for example, if you need to go to a place, like Aisha was able to go to Brazil and so on, how are you able to procure the funding and, organize the time
get the
from your
time
life
as well,
to be able
yeah.
to do that?
So I'll say residencies are a big thing to look into. If you can get a residency in a place with access to like the British Museum where all the stolen artifacts are, go do it, do the research and come back. And now we have the internet, which is just a treasure trove of information. So I do a combination of things. If I can go to a place, I will go, but it's not always possible. So when I can't, you can also do the journalistic thing of finding a fixer. If you can find somebody on the ground who can do some reporting or who can tell you about a place, give you stories about a place, that's another way to get research done. And then with oral histories, what I found helpful is like, a lot of them have actually been written down. Like you came across oral histories that had been written down and transformed. And same thing, like you can go into, for West African history, like the kitabs, the Hausa Chronicles, things like that have a lot of our oral histories. And then even in Ghana here, these pamphlets, if you can find, sometimes just go to Makola and just walk on the streets, and there are these all sorts of books that you can find that have these treasures, and just gather them, and you never know when you'll need them. There's one that comes to mind, Ogwa Aban, that really talks about the movements of Akan people, and it shows you migration through time, and it's one of those pieces that I guess you can find just by walking in the marketplace and looking through pamphlets. Jennifer, I don't know if you have...
In my case, I don't think I would be able to write the current book I'm writing if I was based in Uganda, because there's hardly any money for research. No one would give me any money for research. So for example, the book I'm working on now, I've resigned my teaching job. So I don't have any income coming in from the job. Because I have to travel the whole world, every continent. I have a character from each part of the continent. So I have to go to those parts to see, to feel, to smell, to touch, to taste. Now, what I've done is, as you say, I've gone for fellowships. So I have a Dutch character. Then I Googled Dutch fellowships. And then I big myself up. I've won this, I've done this, and I've done this, and oh my God, you'll be lucky to have me. And I've done that research, yeah? And then I have a character coming from South Africa. Right now, I'm in South Africa. Yes, I wrote to them and I told them I am fantastic. If you could have me. So because they are feeding me, they paid for my ticket. I can't afford to do this on my own if I was just in Africa. And then sometimes I go to the British and I say, I'm going to go to Uganda. I don't say that I come from Uganda. I'm going to go to Uganda and I'm going to do this research. It's very useful to the British in this way. Yes, you are creative. You can't fail to come up with a convincing excuse to the British about your country, that you're bringing something wonderful to them. And then you go and you record those performers, you give them a tape, you keep a tape to yourself. And so I've given myself up to 2026, and I've applied, you have no idea. But that is, I created time by giving up my job. And this is one of the things that people who come to these meetings don't realize. You give up so much for this craft. You can be really poor. I can walk around like, oh my God, I've won a few awards, but absolutely broke, you know, because of the next book. Okay? So it's not a joke. You are going to create your own time. Nobody is going to give it to you. Okay? I've had a lot of people who started with me creative writing. They were good, that they went into teaching and they gave up writing because the check comes from where? From teaching. So you've got to create time and you've got to be very creative in finding money.
I don't know how to top that, but I'm just going to add that I think if you have the idea for the book, start writing it now. I've had an idea for historical fiction in my head for the last 10 years, and I have to go to India, I have to go to the British Museum, I have to go, I mean, I've been to the British Museum, I didn't have the time to do the research then. I've been to India, not to the part that I wanted to go for the research. So I keep saying, well, I'm going to go. But the novel keeps writing itself in my head, and I still haven't written it yet. So don't wait until you do the research. Write the story now, and then the parts that you need the research for, you get the opportunity of doing the research. One way of doing that is reading books that are set in those places. It gives you a sense of the place, the characters, and things like that. So start writing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, wonderful audience.
So this is one of Jennifer's books, Chintu. As they say, buy a book, read a book, and book your place. This is one of Aisha's books, and these are all available on the stands to our left, and they will be there to sign them for you. And this is one of Abu Bakar's books too. They are all available on the bookshelf to the left, and they will be there to sign them for you.